The late summer sunlight in Willow Grove, a small town nestled between golden wheat fields and lush oak forests, had a way of weaving through the leaves, casting shimmering patches of light on the red dirt road that led into the center. But today, that sunlight brought no warmth to James Carter. The 38-year-old man, tall and broad-shouldered with light brown hair, streaked with a few silver strands, stepped out of a sleek black SUV. His expensive leather shoes crunched softly on the gravel. He pushed down the bridge of his square glasses, his deep blue eyes fixed on the First Presbyterian Church, its white roof tiles and aging bell tower still standing tall like his childhood memories. James, a white American millionaire and CEO of a tech company in New York, had not returned here in 10 years. Today, he had come to say goodbye to his late father. But the weight in his chest wasn't only grief. It was also the burden of choices he once believed were right. He adjusted his tie, feeling the heat rising from the pavement through his gray suit. Willow Grove remained unchanged. White-painted wooden houses, porches hung with geranium baskets, birdsong mingling with the whisper of the wind. But he was no longer the boy they once called Lex, running barefoot across the fields or fishing by the lake with his father. The city had honed him into a sharp, cold man of million-dollar deals and lavish parties. That success had once made him proud. But now, standing before the church, he felt like a stranger, an outsider in his hometown. Inside the church, the cool air carried the scent of old wood and candle wax. James quietly sat on the last pew, avoiding the curious glances of former neighbors. They whispered, calling him Lex, with a mix of surprise and affection. He only nodded, his hands gripping the edge of the pew. The organ played, pulling him into a stream of thought. He wanted to focus on the eulogy, to mourn his father, but a more profound regret clung to him. His father, the man who had always taught him that family was everything, had died without ever hearing him say, "I'm sorry." James had chosen his career, transcontinental flights, offices that never slept, over family dinners and Sunday afternoons. And now that his father was gone, he finally understood the price of those choices. Then he saw her. Vanessa Brooks. James's heart seemed to stop. She was seated in the third row from the altar, her back straight, elegant hands resting on a pale blue dress. Her glossy black curls were pinned neatly, revealing a face that still radiated beauty, despite time having etched a few delicate lines near her eyes. Vanessa, the black American woman who had once been his whole world and his wife. But what took James's breath away wasn't her. It was the 3 children beside her. 2 little girls in matching floral dresses, their hair braided neatly, and a little boy with big round eyes and a head of wild curls. Triplets. James clenched his hands, his nails digging into his palms. Vanessa had children, 3 of them. His mind reeled. He and Vanessa had never had children. 10 years ago, when doctors told him he was infertile due to a childhood illness, he had built a wall between them. Coldly and cruelly, he had said he didn't want kids, that family wasn't what he needed. But now, watching Vanessa gently stroke the boy's hair, he felt a sharp pain, as if someone were tearing open his chest. That could have been his family. Those children, with their bright smiles and innocent eyes, could have borne his name. Vanessa suddenly looked up, her gaze meeting his. Only a second. But that second stretched like a lifetime. In her eyes, he saw surprise, then a flicker of pain, before she smiled, polite but distant. He managed a nod, his throat dry. The church bell rang, signaling the start of the sermon, but James heard nothing. He only saw Vanessa whispering to the girl beside her, and the boy resting his head on her shoulder with absolute trust. Everything he once thought he didn't need now stood before him, alive and beautiful, but not his. When the service ended, the crowd slowly filtered out, murmuring. James remained seated, his hands trembling. Vanessa rose, guiding the 3 children toward the door. The boy tripped, and she instantly bent down, lifting him with a mother's tenderness. James watched, his heart pounding. He wanted to call her name, to say something, but the words lodged in his throat. Vanessa disappeared through the doorway, leaving him with a silent question. Could he ever reclaim what he had lost? He stood and stepped outside, the sunlight glaring once more on his face. Willow Grove was still peaceful, but inside James, a storm had begun to stir. He knew that his life would never be the same from then on. Vanessa and the children had awakened something he had buried deep, the longing for a home, a family, and a second chance. But the question that now haunted him was this: did she still have space for him in her life? And did he have the courage to step forward? James Carter stood still beneath the old oak tree outside the First Presbyterian Church. The Willow Grove sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting interwoven patches of light and shadow on the ground. The church bells continued to echo, blending with the crowd's murmurs departing the service. But in James's mind, all sounds faded. Only the image of Vanessa Brooks and the triplets, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, remained, vivid as a living painting etched deep into his memory. She had built a family, a life in which he had once been the center, but which he had destroyed. Memories from 10 years ago surged back, pulling him into the days in New York when their love had burned bright like the city lights, before it dissolved like a forgotten dream. 10 years ago, James and Vanessa were a young couple, full of passion and hope. They met at a small cafe in Brooklyn, where Vanessa, a Black American preschool teacher with a radiant smile, accidentally spilled coffee on James's shirt. At the time, he was a freshly graduated software engineer. He didn't get angry, he just laughed, and her apology opened the door to a love story. They married within a year in a simple ceremony at Prospect Park. Vanessa wore a plain white dress, and James borrowed a friend's suit. They didn't have much money, but their love was big enough to fill their cramped apartment in Queens, where the smell of Vanessa's homemade cookies mixed with laughter during old movie nights. With his light brown hair and sharp blue eyes, James was ambitious. He worked day and night at a tech startup, dreaming of publicizing the company. With her glossy black curls and natural gentleness, Vanessa was always his anchor. She taught preschool during the day and cared for their home at night, turning simple meals into warm moments. They used to lie in bed, hand in hand, whispering about the future, a little house, a garden, and children running across the yard. "I want our kids to have your eyes," James had once said, and Vanessa had blushed, cheeks glowing. But that dream was soon tested. When Vanessa began talking about having children, her eyes lit up each time she held a friend's baby or paused by a playground. James wanted that too, but he grew anxious. They tried for months, but nothing happened. Doctor visits became a cold series of exams, tests, charts, and finally, a verdict. The doctor, in a flat tone, told them James was infertile due to a childhood illness. He sat in the clinic, staring at his polished shoes, feeling the world collapse. Vanessa held his hand and whispered, "We can try something else, James. Adoption, IVF. We'll have a family." But he said nothing. A quiet shame began to burn inside him, like a fire consuming his pride. James, who had always prided himself on control, the deals he'd closed, the awards displayed on his shelf, now felt useless. To the world, he was a successful man. But inside that small apartment, he felt unworthy of being Vanessa's husband. He began to withdraw. Late nights at the office became routine. Conversations with Vanessa were shortened to small talk. She remained patient, still cooked dinners he rarely touched, still smiled, though the light in her eyes was fading. But even patience has its limits. One rainy night, Vanessa sat on the couch, hugging a pillow, and gently asked, "James, would you consider adoption? I know a center so that we could start there." James, exhausted from a long day, felt an irrational wave of anger rise. "I don't want children, Vanessa," he said, his voice like ice. "This may be for the best. Family isn't what I need." The words, sharp as blades, cut through the air. Vanessa looked at him, her deep brown eyes full of pain. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She stood. "If that's what you want," she said, her voice trembling, "then I can't stay." That night, Vanessa packed a small suitcase, just clothes and a wedding photo. James sat in the dark living room, listening to the door close. But he didn't get up. His pride, the thing he once thought was strength, held him in place. He convinced himself it was the right decision, that Vanessa deserved a whole man. But when she left, she took all the light with her. In the following months, James threw himself into work, rising rapidly to become the youngest CEO in the company's history. But every night, he faced a hollow silence in his new luxury apartment. The photos of Vanessa, he never deleted them, are still lying quietly on his phone, reminders of the greatest mistake of his life. Now, standing outside the church in Willow Grove, that pain came alive again, sharper than ever. Vanessa hadn't just moved on. She had built a family. She had become the mother he had once imagined she'd be, but not with him. 3 children, smiling like her, were proof of Vanessa's strength, and a painful reminder of what he had thrown away. He wondered what she had endured, how much she had suffered, and whether any part of her heart still had space for him. He wanted to step forward, to say sorry, but fear of rejection, of facing himself, held him back. James slowly walked toward the SUV, his hand clutching the keys tightly. He knew this encounter wasn't a coincidence. With its familiar streets and unfaded memories, Willow Grove was forcing him to confront who he truly was. But did he have the courage to face Vanessa, the children, and the past he had run from? As he opened the car door, a gentle breeze swept past, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, like a whisper. Second chances don't come easy, but it's here, if he dares to take it. Vanessa Brooks stepped out of the First Presbyterian Church, gently guiding Liam, her youngest son, with a head of messy curls. At the same time, Maya and Zoe chirped beside her, pointing excitedly at the bright red geraniums lining the road. The Willow Grove sunlight shone on her face, highlighting her smooth brown skin and deep eyes, which held both joy and the invisible scars of the past. She smiled at the children, but inside, the unexpected encounter with James Carter stirred a quiet storm. He had been at the back of the church, tall, dressed in a gray suit, his deep blue eyes fixed on her as if trying to say something. Vanessa had smiled, a polite smile to mask the turmoil within. But when she turned away, her heart felt heavy. James, the man who had once meant everything, was now a memory she had tried to bury. But Willow Grove had a way of reviving things one thought were forgotten. 10 years ago, when Vanessa left James, she carried a broken heart and a small suitcase. His words, "I don't want children," weren't just words. They were a blade that cut down the dream of a family she had envisioned during the nights she lay in his arms. With the same radiant curls and smile that once captivated James, Vanessa had tried to understand him and to forgive the pain that led him to say those things. But she couldn't stay beside someone who chose pride over love. She left New York and returned to Willow Grove, where she had grown up in a small wooden house with her mother and Sunday hymns. There, she tried to find herself again, but the journey was not easy. Vanessa worked at a local preschool, teaching children to paint and sing nursery rhymes. But she was lonely every evening when she returned to the small rented apartment on the outskirts of town. She had once believed her love for James would last forever, but now the dream of a family seems out of reach. Then she met David, a Black American painter with a gentle smile and paint-stained hands. David had no grand ambitions, no million-dollar deals like James, but he brought her peace. They married after a year in a small backyard ceremony at Vanessa's mother's house, with glowing candles and the soft strumming of guitars played by friends. Vanessa and David longed for children, but they soon learned they both faced fertility challenges. Undeterred, they decided to try artificial insemination, a journey filled with both hope and anxiety. After many months of waiting, Vanessa received the news that she was pregnant, with triplets. Maya, Zoe, and Liam were born in spring, bringing light into her world. She still remembered holding their tiny bodies for the first time, feeling their faint breaths against her chest. And David, eyes brimming with tears, whispering, "We're a family." But that joy was short-lived. When the children turned 3, David was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. He passed away just 4 months later, leaving Vanessa with 3 children and a void that could never be filled. In the years that followed, Vanessa became a resilient, single mother. She worked full days at the school, cooked nightly dinner, read bedtime stories, and mended old clothes to save money. She taught Maya how to braid her hair, encouraged Zoe to draw like her father, and held Liam when he cried, missing the daddy in the sky. Every time she saw her children smile, she saw David in their eyes, but she also saw her strength. She didn't let grief define her. She used it to build a loving home. With its close-knit community and warm church gatherings, Willow Grove became her anchor. But deep down, Vanessa kept a small corner in her heart for James. Not for love, but for a question. If he had been honest, would everything have turned out differently? Having seen James at the church, Vanessa sensed a change in him. He was no longer the ambitious young man, but someone with fine lines at the corners of his eyes and a gaze heavy with regret. She no longer hated him. Time had soothed the pain, but she was afraid. Afraid that his return would disrupt the stable life she had built for Maya, Zoe, and Liam. Afraid that old feelings, buried deep, might resurface. When Liam tugged her hand and asked, "Who's that tall man, Mommy?" Vanessa smiled and replied, "An old friend of mine." But in her heart, she knew James wasn't just the past. He was an unanswered question, a door she had never dared reopen. Vanessa led the children home, to a small wooden house with a porch full of flowers. She opened the door, letting the children run in, their laughter ringing like music. But as she stood in the kitchen preparing lunch, James's image reappeared in her mind. She wondered why he had returned. Had he truly changed? She didn't want to hope. But a part of her, the part that still remembered nights holding hands with him, whispered, "If he stays, what would I do?" Vanessa shook her head, focusing on slicing tomatoes, but a single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting the children to see. She had learned to be strong. But in the face of James, she realized even strength had its cracks. Morning in Willow Grove began with the chirping of sparrows in the old oak trees and the scent of freshly cut grass drifting through the air. James Carter sat at the kitchen table in his mother Helen's wooden house, flipping through a stack of thank-you cards sent after his father's funeral. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting his face and highlighting the new wrinkles forming at the corners of his eyes. He was still dressed in a suit, but his tie was loosened, and the top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the weariness of a man who had lived under the bright lights of New York offices, but now felt lost in the memories of home. The unexpected encounter with Vanessa Brooks at the church yesterday still haunted him. The image of her, with her glossy black curls pinned up and her gaze both gentle and distant, alongside the three children, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, refused to leave his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about all he had lost. James was folding a card when the doorbell rang. "James, can you get that?" Helen called from the living room, her voice warm but tired. He stood up and walked through the old wooden hallway, once filled with the echoes of his childhood laughter. When he opened the door, he nearly froze. Vanessa stood in a pale yellow sundress, holding a plate of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. A sweet aroma wafted toward him. Beside her were Maya and Zoe, wearing matching floral dresses and holding hands shyly. With his unruly curls, Liam hid behind his mother's leg, staring up at James with wide eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding," Vanessa said softly, her voice carrying a trace of hesitation. "I just wanted to bring something by and check on Ms. Helen." James blinked, trying to hide his surprise. "No, not at all," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Please, come in." He stepped aside, gripping the doorknob tightly as if to steady himself. Vanessa smiled and led the children into the house. Maya looked around cautiously, while Zoe whispered something to Liam that made him giggle. Helen appeared from the living room, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Vanessa. "Oh, Vanessa, darling," she exclaimed, wrapping her in an embrace like a daughter. "I've missed you so much." Vanessa smiled and handed Helen the plate of cornbread. "I'm so sorry about Mr. Carter," she said sincerely. "He was always kind to me." "I know," Helen replied, her gaze moving warmly to the children. "And who do we have here?" Vanessa introduced them, gently touching each child's head. "This is Maya and Zoe," she said, pointing to the girls and then brushing Liam's hair. "And this little one is Liam." James crouched down, trying to ease the tension. "Hello there," he said gently. Liam looked up and announced, "You're tall." The innocent comment made everyone laugh, lightening the mood. Vanessa's shoulders relaxed, and her eyes softened as she watched James interact with her son. Helen quickly fetched cookies and juice from the kitchen and invited the children to sit around the small wooden table. The most serious, Maya sat upright, watching James as if sizing him up. Zoe, more outgoing, began doodling on the paper Helen handed her while Liam scooted his chair closer to Vanessa, clutching her dress. James stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene, Vanessa, the children, and his mother. It looked like the family portrait he had once dreamed of, but had destroyed with his own hands. "Are you doing okay, James?" Vanessa asked quietly and sincerely as Helen took the children into the living room to grab more crayons. He nodded, though his heart thudded in his chest. "It's just strange," he replied. "Everything here feels the same, but also completely different." Vanessa nodded, her eyes drifting over the kitchen, stopping at an old photo of the Carter family hanging on the wall. "Willow Grove has a way of reminding us what matters," she said in a low voice. James swallowed hard. He wanted to apologize, to tell her how deeply he regretted everything, but all he managed to say was, "Thank you for the cornbread, and for coming." Vanessa smiled, but it was reserved, as if she was weighing something in her heart. "I should get going," she said, glancing at her watch. "The kids need lunch." She called Maya, Zoe, and Liam, and guided them to the door. Liam tripped, and James instinctively bent down to catch him. "Careful there, little man," he said with a smile. Liam grinned back, revealing a missing front tooth. As Vanessa and the children stepped off the porch, she turned and said, "If you're still around, we'll be at church on Sunday. You're welcome to come." James nodded before he could think. His heartbeat quickened. "I'll be there," he said, more firmly than he expected. Zoe waved. Maya gave him one last curious look, and Liam shouted, "Bye, tall man!" When the door closed, James stood still, his hand resting on the frame, feeling like he had just found a long-lost piece of himself. Inside Vanessa, the visit left a feeling she couldn't quite name. She drove home with the children singing in the back seat, but her thoughts were in turmoil. James was no longer the arrogant man who had once pushed her away. He had looked at her and the children with longing in his eyes. But she was afraid that letting him back into their lives would disrupt the peace she had worked so hard to build. Afraid that the children, especially Maya, with her sensitive heart, would grow attached to him, only to be hurt if he left again. But deep down, she sensed sincerity in James's voice, which unsettled her. She told herself it was just a polite visit. But when she parked in front of her house and looked into the rearview mirror, she saw it, a glimmer of hope in her eyes that she couldn't deny. Saturday afternoon in Willow Grove carried a familiar sense of calm, the soft golden sunlight spilling over wheat fields and the gentle wind rustling the oak leaves. James Carter, wearing a simple blue shirt and far removed from his polished New York CEO image, stood on the porch of Vanessa Brooks's wooden house, holding a bag of children's books he had just bought. The church invitation Vanessa gave him the other day had left him sleepless, not from anxiety, but from something strange. Hope. Today, she had messaged him, saying Liam wanted him to read a story. James, though nervous, couldn't say no. He wanted to grow closer to Vanessa and the triplets, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, but he also knew the journey wouldn't be easy. Vanessa opened the door, her glossy black curls tied up, flour dusting her apron. "You're right on time," she smiled, her voice warm but still reserved. "The kids are out back." James stepped inside, catching the scent of freshly baked cookies drifting through the air. Vanessa's small wooden house was cozy but straightforward, with children's drawings on the walls and a worn rug in the living room. He followed her into the backyard, where Maya, Zoe, and Liam played on an old swing set. Liam spotted James and shouted, "Tall man, you're here!" The boy ran over and hugged his leg, making James laugh. His heart warmed in a way he hadn't expected. Zoe, the spirited one with a bright smile, tugged James toward the wooden table beneath the oak tree. "Can you draw?" she asked, handing him a piece of paper and colored pencils. Clumsy but willing, James sat down and sketched a dinosaur at Zoe's request. She burst out laughing at the dinosaur with a huge tail. Maya, the more reserved sister, sat at the corner of the table, hugging a book, her eyes watching James warily. Vanessa stood nearby, holding a tray of lemonade, quietly observing. She noticed James's efforts and the suspicion in Maya's eyes, which worried her. James opened the book bag and pulled out a story about adventurous bears. "Who wants a story?" he asked excitedly. Liam immediately climbed into the seat beside him, while Zoe sat cross-legged on the grass. After a moment of hesitation, Maya approached as well, but kept her distance. James read with animated voices for each character, low and deep for the papa bear, high-pitched for the baby bear, making Liam and Zoe giggle. Vanessa, standing on the porch, couldn't help but smile. James had a natural charm she hadn't expected, but she reminded herself to be cautious. Children bonded easily, and she didn't want them hurt if James left again. When the story ended, Liam handed James a clumsy drawing, a tall man with brown hair standing next to a little boy. "This is you and me," Liam declared, eyes sparkling. James took the drawing, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "Thanks, buddy," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Then Maya, silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "How do you know our mom?" Her voice was sharp, her eyes scrutinizing. James was caught off guard. He glanced at Vanessa, who was gripping the lemonade tray tightly. He took a breath and chose his words carefully. He said gently that your mom and I have been friends a long time, from before you were born. I used to live here, but then I went away. Now I'm back and happy to meet you, Zoe, and Liam. Maya didn't respond. She only nodded slightly, but her gaze remained guarded. Vanessa stepped forward, placing the tray down. Maya, can you help me bring the glasses inside? The girl stood and followed her mother, but glared at James before going. In the kitchen, Vanessa quietly asked, Are you okay, sweetheart? Maya, her small hands clasped tightly, whispered, I don't want him to make you sad. Vanessa held her daughter close, her heart tightening. No one will make us sad, baby, she promised. But inside, she knew she was wrestling with her feelings too. Back outside, James continued playing with Zoe and Liam, pushing the swings and pretending to be a monster chasing them, sending them into fits of laughter. But he couldn't stop thinking about Maya's question. He understood that to become part of their lives, he needed to earn their trust, not just Vanessa's, but also the children's. When Vanessa and Maya returned, she invited James to stay for dinner. Just spaghetti and meatballs, she teased. James nodded, grateful. Sounds perfect, he said, casting a hopeful glance toward Maya. Dinner unfolded with laughter from Liam and Zoe, but Maya remained quiet, eating silently while observing everything. After the meal, James helped Vanessa with the dishes while the kids watched cartoons in the living room. Maya's a smart girl, James said, as they stood side by side at the sink. Vanessa nodded, drying a plate, her voice soft. She's sensitive, and she misses her dad. James swallowed hard, guilt creeping in. He said, I won't hurt them, looking her in the eye. Vanessa didn't reply immediately, but her eyes softened. Let's take things slowly, James, she said. Time will tell. When James left, Zoe waved. Liam hugged him again, and Maya gave a subtle nod. He walked to his car, the Willow Grove moonlight shining on his face. He knew he was walking a challenging path, but it felt like the right one for the first time in years. Inside, Vanessa watched her children sleeping peacefully, her heart in turmoil. James was trying, but she asked herself, could she trust him again? Not just for her own sake, but for Maya, Zoe, and Liam. Night fell over Willow Grove, casting a gentle veil of mist over the wooden rooftops and golden wheat fields. Inside Vanessa Brooks's small house, the kitchen lights gave off a soft amber glow, illuminating children's drawings on the walls and the old wooden table where Vanessa stood washing dishes. The children, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, were fast asleep in their room, their steady breaths forming a gentle lullaby in the house's quiet. After a dinner filled with laughter from the children, James Carter had stayed to help Vanessa clean up, even though she told him he didn't have to. He stood beside the sink, drying a plate, his blue shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. He no longer looked like the polished CEO from New York, but like a man trying to find his way back into a world he once walked away from. Vanessa glanced at James. His light brown hair was slightly tousled, and his deep blue eyes now held a sincerity she hadn't seen 10 years ago. The way he played with the children that afternoon, the patience in his voice when answering Maya's questions, and the bright smile when Liam hugged him, left her unsettled. She wanted to believe he had changed, but her heart, once shattered by his cold words, still held up an invisible wall. As the last plate was stacked in the cupboard, Vanessa wiped her hands on her apron and broke the silence. Thanks for staying to help, she said softly, a touch hesitant. James smiled, setting the towel down. I like being here, he replied. Then, in a lower voice, he added, with you and the kids. Those simple words made Vanessa freeze for a moment. She turned away, pretending to rearrange the spice jars on the shelf, but her heart beat faster. James sensed the tension, but he knew, if he didn't speak now, he might never get another chance. "Vanessa," he said, his voice husky. "Can I talk to you for a bit? Just a moment." She took a deep breath, nodded, and led him to the living room. They sat on the old couch, the dim lamp casting a soft light over her face, highlighting her smooth brown skin and those deep, expressive eyes holding strength and old wounds. James looked down, his hands clasped tightly, as if trying to untangle a mess of thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot since I saw you at the church," he began, his voice slightly trembling. "About what happened 10 years ago. About the things I said, and the things I didn't. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I was wrong to push you away." Vanessa looked at him, her hands clenched on her lap. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes, gentle yet wounded, said she had waited a long time to hear that. "James," she said quietly, her voice steady, "an apology can't erase what happened. You know, I tried to understand you. I tried to stay. But when you said you didn't want children, you weren't just rejecting my dream. You were rejecting me." Her words cut like a blade, but James didn't flinch. He nodded, eyes reddening. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "Back then, I was scared. When the doctor told me I was infertile, I felt like I wasn't a man anymore, like I didn't deserve you. So I built a wall and said cruel things to hide my shame. But I was wrong, Vanessa. I didn't just hurt you. I hurt myself too." He paused and took a breath. "Every day after you left, I regretted it. I kept our photos and memories as if they could somehow bring you back. But I never looked for you because I believed you deserved someone better." Vanessa listened, her heart in turmoil. She remembered crying alone in Willow Grove, the days she questioned if she had done something wrong. She remembered David, the man who had healed her with gentle love, and she remembered the pain of losing him. And now James, the man who had once been her whole world, sat here, exposing his soul. She admitted, "I was angry at you," her voice quiet but firm. "Angry that you weren't honest. Furious. You chose pride over us. But I don't hate you, James. I've learned to let go, because I had to live for Maya, Zoe, and Liam. They're everything to me." James nodded, his gaze drifting to a photo on the wall. Vanessa holding the 3 children, her smile radiant but resolute. "You're an incredible mother," he said sincerely, "and I know I have no right to step into your life, or theirs. But I want to try, Vanessa. Not to go back to what we were, but to build something new, if you'll let me." Vanessa looked at him, saw the truth in his eyes, and felt the fear in her heart. She said, trembling, "I don't know if I can trust you again. Not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid. Afraid for the kids, afraid for myself." The air between them grew heavy, not with bitterness, but with the raw sincerity of 2 people who had once loved deeply. James reached out, hesitantly, and placed his hand over hers as gently as if he feared she might pull away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away," he said. "I'm just asking for a chance to prove it, one day at a time." Vanessa didn't pull her hand back, but didn't answer either. She stared at their hands, feeling his warmth, and a part of her, the part that remembered holding hands beneath the streetlights of New York, wanted to believe him. But another part, the one that had survived heartbreak, told her to be careful. The ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. Vanessa stood, quickly wiping the corner of her eye. "It's late," she said gently. "You should get some rest." James nodded and rose. But before leaving, he said, "Thank you for listening, Vanessa. I won't give up." She smiled. A small, quiet smile, but real. "One day at a time, James," she echoed, as if making a silent promise. When the door closed, Vanessa stood alone in the living room, staring out the window where moonlight touched the yard. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of light rise within her heart. The sunset bathed Willow Grove in a brilliant orange hue, painting the wheat fields gold and casting a warm glow on the wooden houses, making them shimmer like something out of a painting. James Carter sat on a wooden bench in the backyard of Vanessa Brooks's house, holding a glass of cold lemonade, his eyes following Maya, Zoe, and Liam as they played on the grass. Their laughter mingled with the soft rustling of the oak trees. Dressed in a gray t-shirt and simple jeans, James no longer resembled the polished tech CEO who once ruled boardrooms in New York. But today, he carried a decision that would change everything, a decision that made even him nervous to share with Vanessa. Vanessa stepped out from the kitchen, her glossy black curls loosely tied, a pale blue dress hugging her graceful frame. She set a plate of freshly baked cookies on the table and smiled as Liam pretended to be a superhero chasing Zoe. Their honest conversation the night before lingered in her heart, a fragile yet powerful reconnection. She saw that he was trying, but she remained cautious, not just for herself, but for the children, especially Maya, who still kept her distance from him. She said, "The kids like having you here," sitting down beside James, her voice gentle. "But I wonder, how long do you plan to stay in Willow Grove?" Vanessa's question, though softly spoken, cut through the calm like an arrow. James set down his glass, took a deep breath, and met her eyes. "That's what I came to talk to you about," he began, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "I spoke to the board of directors last week. I've decided to step down as CEO. I'll remain a shareholder, but not return to New York. I want to stay here, Vanessa, with you and the kids." Vanessa blinked, his words like a gust of wind stirring something profound in her chest. She knew his company, a tech giant in artificial intelligence, was his life, the place he had poured all his ambition and effort into, becoming the youngest CEO in the industry. "James," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that's a huge decision. You built everything there. Are you sure?" James nodded, his eyes unwavering. "I've never been more sure. For the past 10 years, I lived for work, for numbers, deals, and the spotlight. But it didn't give my life meaning. When I saw you and the kids at church, I realized what I wanted: a home, a family. I want my time to belong to something that truly matters." His words, sincere and resolute, left Vanessa silent. She looked at him and saw a man different from James from 10 years ago, the one who chose pride over love. But she also saw the risk. "James," she said softly, "I know you're trying, and I appreciate that. But you understand, the kids need stability. If you stay, and one day change your mind again, I'm not sure they could handle it. Maya already asked me if you were going to make me sad. I don't want her to be afraid again." James lowered his head, his hand tightening on the edge of the bench. He thought of Maya, the girl with those cautious eyes, and his guilt rose. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm not promising I'll be perfect, Vanessa, but I promise I won't leave. I'll prove it, day by day." Vanessa turned her eyes toward the yard, where Maya taught Liam to throw a ball. Her daughter's rare smile warmed her heart. She wanted to believe James, but the memory of those nights crying alone after he rejected her dream of family still lingered. "I need time," she said gently but firmly. "Not just for me, but for the kids. They had already lost one father. I can't let them grow attached to someone only to lose him again. James nodded, his eyes filled with quiet determination. I'll wait, Vanessa, as long as it takes. Suddenly, Zoe ran over and grabbed his hand. Uncle James, play ball with us, she cheered, her face glowing. James laughed and stood up, leaving Vanessa to her thoughts. He ran across the yard, letting Liam defeat him in a make-believe match, making all three children laugh. From the bench, Vanessa watched him. She saw how patiently he showed Maya how to hold the ball, and how he lifted Zoe onto his shoulders when she got tired. He was so natural, as if he belonged there. But she reminded herself to be careful. She didn't want to hope too much. Yet the way he looked at the children, the way he looked at her, sparked a fragile light in her heart. As the sun set, Vanessa called the kids in for dinner. James stayed, helping her prepare the salad and reheat the stew. In the kitchen, once the children were seated at the table, Vanessa turned to him and said quietly, "Your decision. It surprised me, but I can see you're serious. It's just that I need to be sure." James smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I'll give you every reason to believe me, Vanessa," he replied. Dinner was filled with laughter, but Vanessa realized, no matter how she tried to keep her distance, that James was slowly becoming a part of their lives. When James left, the Willow Grove moonlight lit the red dirt road. He strolled, thinking about Vanessa, Maya, Zoe, and Liam. Giving up his career hadn't been easy, but for the first time, he felt free, like he was finally on the right path. Vanessa stood by the window inside the house, watching his figure fade into the night. She hugged herself, her heart beating fast. She didn't know if she could fully open her heart again, but she knew one thing: James was changing, and that filled her with both hope and fear. Sunday afternoon in Willow Grove was bathed in gentle sunlight, with golden rays streaming through the oak trees and scattering shimmering patches of light on the backyard lawn behind Vanessa Brooks's house. A simple picnic had been set up in the yard, a blanket spread wide, plates of sandwiches and potato chips, and the cheerful laughter of Maya, Zoe, and Liam ringing out like a joyful melody. In a soft blue t-shirt and jeans, James Carter sat beside Vanessa, helping her slice watermelon. His eyes occasionally drifted toward the children with a quiet smile. His decision to step down from his role as CEO and stay in Willow Grove had made Vanessa look at him differently, but she still maintained a safe distance, especially when it came to the children and their easily bruised hearts. Vanessa observed James with the children, wearing her glossy black curls, loosely tied, and wearing a light floral dress. He had become familiar in their recent days, reading bedtime stories to Liam, helping Zoe draw dinosaurs, and patiently answering Maya's curious and often cautious questions. But she knew that gaining the children's acceptance wouldn't happen overnight, no matter how sincere James was. Maya remained reserved, Zoe was more carefree, and Liam had easily grown attached. Today, she hoped the picnic would be a step forward, a chance for their family and James to feel a little more whole. The children were playing catch nearby, Zoe's laughter ringing out as she tried to throw the ball higher than Liam. Having just finished slicing a piece of watermelon, James turned to Vanessa and spoke in a low voice so the kids wouldn't hear. "I've been thinking a lot about the kids," he said, his deep blue eyes full of sincerity. "I can't replace David, but I want to be a father, Vanessa. If you and the children are willing to give me that chance." Vanessa took a deep breath, her heart pounding. James's words, though gentle, carried a weight she wasn't quite ready to face. Before she could respond, a sharp little voice cut through the moment. "You're not my dad!" Zoe stood there. The ball dropped in the grass, her wide eyes filled with fear. With her braided hair and floral dress, the girl had overheard James's words. "Zoe," Vanessa called, standing up. But the girl shouted, "I don't want you to be my dad!" and ran toward the big oak tree, hiding behind its trunk. Liam looked on, confused, while Maya stepped forward, her gaze steady on James, as if she had been expecting this. Vanessa's chest tightened. Her greatest fear, that the children would be emotionally shaken, was unfolding before her eyes. James stood up, his face full of worry, but he didn't look away. "I'll talk to her," he said firmly. Vanessa nodded, though her heart was in turmoil. She turned to comfort Liam, pulling him into her arms. James strolled to the oak tree, crouching to Zoe's level. The girl was hugging her knees, her eyes red with tears. "Zoe," he said softly, "I'm sorry if I scared you. I don't want to replace your dad. I want to be here, to care for you, Maya, and Liam, if you'll let me." Zoe sniffled, her voice trembling. "But my daddy's in the sky. If you become my daddy, he'll be sad." James felt a sharp ache in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Your daddy will always be your daddy, Zoe," he said gently, his eyes full of honesty. "I would never try to take that away. I want to be your friend, someone you can trust. And if you don't want that right now, I won't push you." Zoe looked at him, tears trailing down her cheeks, but the sincerity in his voice softened something in her. "I don't hate you," she whispered. "I'm just scared." James smiled softly, gently wiping her tears. "I understand. I'm scared too. But I promise, I'll never make you sad." From afar, Vanessa watched the moment unfold, her heart both heavy and relieved. She saw how James was patient and respected Zoe's feelings, and it moved her. When Zoe took James's hand and led him back, Vanessa embraced her daughter, whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart." Zoe nodded, leaning into her mother, but the fear in her eyes had lessened as she looked at James. Maya stood nearby, still silent, but she didn't turn away. It was a small sign of openness. The picnic continued, though not with the same carefree joy as before. James played with Liam, pretending to lose a race, making the little boy laugh loudly. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat and talked with Maya. "What do you think of Uncle James?" she asked gently. Maya shrugged, her voice quiet. "I don't know. I don't want anyone to replace Daddy, but he's nice to Zoe." Vanessa nodded, holding her close, knowing this journey would take time. As the sun set, James helped Vanessa pack up. Their eyes met in the kitchen. "Thank you for handling things with Zoe," she said sincerely. James nodded, his eyes soft. "I want them to feel safe," he replied. "And I want you to know I'm serious." Vanessa smiled, a more genuine smile than the ones before. "I can see that," she said quietly. When James left, the moonlight lit the red dirt road. He strolled, thinking about Vanessa, Maya, Zoe, and Liam. Giving up his career hadn't been easy, but he felt a new sense of resolve in this moment. Vanessa stood by the window inside the house, watching him disappear into the night. She wrapped her arms around herself, her heart racing. She didn't know if she dared to fully let him in again, but she knew one thing: James was proving himself. And that stirred in her a flicker of hope and a lingering question. Was she ready to let him stay? Sunday morning in Willow Grove began with the first Presbyterian church bells echoing down red dirt roads, mingling with the cheerful chirping of sparrows in the oaks. James Carter stood before the mirror in his mother's wooden house, adjusting a pale blue dress shirt, his hands trembling slightly as he tied his tie. He wasn't used to church, not because he lacked faith, but because 10 years in New York had made him a stranger to the quiet rituals of his hometown. But Vanessa Brooks's invitation, "We'll be at church Sunday. You're welcome to come," was something he couldn't ignore. Today, he wanted to show, not just to Vanessa, but to himself, that he was serious about staying in Willow Grove. James entered the church as colored light from stained glass windows cast rainbow hues across the old wooden pews. The air was cool, scented faintly of candle wax and aged wood. He strolled, his leather shoes barely making a sound, trying to avoid the curious glances of familiar faces. Some whispered, calling him Jimmy, with a mix of surprise and nostalgia. He only nodded, his heart racing as he searched for Vanessa. And then he saw her, sitting near the front, in a deep blue dress, her glossy black curls pinned neatly, surrounded by Maya, Zoe, and Liam. Maya wore a sleek gray dress, Zoe a bright floral one, and Liam, in a tiny button-up and red bow tie, fidgeted with his shoes. Vanessa looked up, her deep brown eyes meeting his, and she smiled. Not the polite smile from their first encounter, but something warm, genuine, like a greeting that needed no words. "Uncle James!" Liam shouted, running down the aisle and throwing his arms around James's leg before Vanessa could stop him. James laughed and scooped the boy up, a warmth spreading through his chest. He said, "You're a quick little guy," ruffling Liam's hair. Vanessa gestured for him to sit beside them, her voice soft. "Maya and Zoe saved you a seat." Zoe waved. Maya gave a slight nod. Her eyes were still cautious, but not as guarded as before. James sat down, feeling the warmth of the children beside him. He didn't feel like an outsider for the first time in years. The service began with a familiar hymn, the choir's voices reviving childhood memories in James's mind. He sang along, off-key, which made Zoe giggle. Beside him, Vanessa sang with a clear, gentle voice, and her eyes softened as she watched Liam rest his head on James's shoulder, eyes closed, nearly asleep. James felt a strange peace, as though he belonged here, with Vanessa and the children. When the pastor stepped up to the pulpit, his sermon spoke of returning, about the courage to face one's mistakes and the grace in new beginnings. "God does not ask for perfection," the pastor said, "only for honesty and the willingness to make things right." The words struck James deeply, his eyes stinging. He glanced at Vanessa and saw her looking at him, glowing with an unnamed emotion. She gently touched his hand, a small gesture, but full of meaning, as if to say, "I see you. I understand." James lightly squeezed her fingers. His heart pounded, but he didn't dare hope too much. Maya, sitting beside Vanessa, noticed the moment. She said nothing, but her eyes softened, perhaps reconsidering something quietly. As the final hymn played, Liam woke with a yawn and leaned into James's shoulder. Zoe handed him a folded piece of paper, a drawing of a tall man labeled Uncle James. "Thank you, Zoe," James said, carefully folding the note and slipping it into his pocket. After the service, Vanessa led the children outside to the churchyard, where the community gathered beneath the old oak tree to share pastries and coffee. James stood beside her, chatting with neighbors and feeling the warm welcome of Willow Grove. An older woman, his former Sunday school teacher, took his hand and said, "You've come home, Jimmy. Don't go away again, okay?" James smiled and nodded, his eyes drifting to Vanessa, laughing with Liam nearby. "Are you okay?" Vanessa asked, pulling him aside while the children chased each other nearby. James nodded, his voice low and firm. "I've never felt more right than I do now. Not just because of the church, but because I feel like I belong here, with you and the kids." Vanessa looked at him, her eyes soft, though still cautious. "The kids are opening up to you," she said, "but Maya still needs time. And so do I." James nodded, his gaze steady and sincere. "I'll wait, Vanessa, as long as it takes. I want you to know, I'm here. For you. For them." As they left the churchyard, Liam held James's hand. Zoe ran ahead, and Maya walked beside Vanessa, occasionally glancing at him. Vanessa watched the scene, her heart tangled. She saw the changes in James, how he blended into their world, with the children, with the community. But fear still lingered. Fear that the past might repeat. Fear that her trust could be broken again. But when James turned back to smile at her, something shifted. A flicker of hope glowed in her heart. Small, but bright, like sunlight filtering through the oaks. She didn't know what the future held. But today, he had kept his promise. He had come to church, and that, to her, was a beginning. Night in Willow Grove cast a silver glow over the wheat fields and wooden rooftops, creating a stillness as if the entire town held its breath. In the backyard of Vanessa Brooks' home, a string of fairy lights twinkled between the oak branches like scattered stars, casting a soft glow over a wooden table draped in a simple white cloth. James Carter stood beneath the trees in a rolled-up navy shirt, holding a small ring, his fingers trembling slightly. He had spent the entire week preparing for this moment, not to impress, but to make the most sincere promise of his life. Vanessa and the triplets, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, were all he wanted. And tonight, he would ask her if she was ready for a new beginning. Unaware of James's plan, Vanessa stepped into the backyard at his invitation for an outdoor dinner. She wore a pale yellow dress, her glossy black curls cascading naturally around her face. The moonlight highlighted her smooth brown skin and the depth in her eyes. Maya, Zoe, and Liam followed, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the glowing lights and a jar of wildflowers on the table. "Did Uncle James do all this?" Zoe exclaimed, running over to touch the lights. Liam, clutching a stuffed bear, beamed at James while Maya, still the quiet observer, smiled slightly when she saw a corner of the table set with colored pencils and paper, a small gift James had prepared just for her. Vanessa looked around, her heart pounding. She knew this was more than just dinner. "James," she said, her voice low, "did you do all of this?" He nodded, his blue eyes glowing beneath the lights. He said, "I wanted tonight to be special," guiding her and the kids to the table. The dinner was simple: roasted chicken, salad, and cornbread, Vanessa's favorite. But every dish was made carefully. The children burst into laughter as James told a story about the time he burned his kitchen in New York trying to bake cookies, prompting Vanessa to laugh out loud, the most genuine laugh she had shared with him since his return. After dinner, the children settled on a blanket in the grass, drawing and whispering to one another. James took a deep breath, stood up, and fixed his eyes on Vanessa. "Vanessa," he began, his voice rough but steady. "I know this isn't a traditional proposal. There's no orchestra, no spotlight, just me, you, and the kids under the Willow Grove moonlight." Vanessa blinked, her hand tightening around her dress, her heart racing as she realized what was coming. The children paused their drawing, their eyes glowing with quiet excitement, sensing the moment's importance. James stepped closer, knelt on one knee, and pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket, engraved inside with the words, "Once more." "10 years ago, I let you go because of fear and pride," he said, voice trembling. "I destroyed what we had, but you taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be chosen daily. Vanessa, I choose you, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, today and always. Will you give me the honor of starting over, of being your family and theirs?" He paused, his gaze sincere, waiting. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Memories surged: love, loss, heartbreak, but they no longer weighed her down. She looked at James and saw a man who had left his career behind, had been patient with her children, and had proved day by day that he was no longer the man from 10 years ago. She looked at the children, Zoe nodding enthusiastically, Liam grinning wide, and Maya, though quiet, with eyes that sparkled with silent approval. Vanessa knelt beside James, tears falling freely, and embraced him. "I've said yes every day you chose us, James," she whispered. "Yes, I do." The children cheered. Zoe rushed to hug them both. Liam jumped up and down, and Maya, for the first time, stepped forward and gently placed a drawing in James's hand. A picture of 5 people standing under the moonlight. "This is us," she said softly but clearly. James hugged Maya, overwhelmed with emotion, knowing that this moment, this quiet acceptance, was what he had longed for most. Vanessa stood, took his hand, and the moonlight shone on her smile, radiant and whole. After the children had fallen asleep that night, Vanessa and James sat on the backyard bench beneath the still twinkling lights. "I was afraid," she said softly, her fingers interlaced with his. "But I believe in you, James. We'n rebuild." He kissed her forehead, whispering, "I won't let you down." Under the Willow Grove moonlight, they sat without rushing, knowing that their love, once broken, was now blooming again, from the simplest pieces of something true. Under the soft light of early autumn in Willow Grove, the backyard of Vanessa Brooks's home had been transformed into a warm, simple space filled with meaning. With its wide leafy canopy, the old oak tree stood at the center of a modest wedding between James Carter and Vanessa. There were no lavish gowns or extravagant suits, just a white cloth draped across a wooden table, jars of wildflowers, and string lights twinkling between branches as the sunset melted into dusk. James stood beneath the oak in a rolled-up white shirt and dress slacks, his deep blue eyes filled with nervous joy. Vanessa, wearing a pale blue dress that hugged her graceful frame, walked toward him, her hand clutching a small bouquet of daisies picked by the children. Maya, Zoe, and Liam, dressed but adorably, stood proudly beside their mother. Maya and Zoe wore floral dresses, and Liam, in a tiny dress shirt and red bow tie, clutched a small jar of flowers, his eyes shining. The Willow Grove community, from neighbors to the pastor of First Presbyterian Church, gathered around the yard with broad smiles. James's mother, Helen, stood in the front row, eyes shimmering, holding the hand of an old friend. "Jimmy's finally found his way home," she whispered. The pastor, dressed in a plain black robe, began the ceremony with a short prayer, his warm voice mingling with the gentle rustle of oak leaves above. "Today," he said, "we witness not just the union of 2 hearts, but the building of a family forged by love, forgiveness, and courage." James looked at Vanessa, his heart pounding. He remembered the moment under the moonlight when she had knelt and embraced him, tears streaming down her face, and the way the children had cheered, as if they had waited for this day all along. Standing across from James, Vanessa met his gaze. Honest, steady. She remembered the painful years after leaving him, the nights holding Maya, Zoe, and Liam, wondering if she could give them happiness alone. But now, seeing James, the man who had once broken her heart, stand ready to choose her and the children daily, she felt a peace she'd never known. She glanced at the kids, Zoe bouncing with excitement, Liam holding Maya's hand, and Maya smiling truly at James for the first time. Her eyes are no longer wary. Rather than reciting traditional vows, James and Vanessa chose to speak from the heart. James spoke first, his voice hoarse but clear. "Vanessa, he said. I used to think love had to be grand and flawless. But you taught me that real love is made of small choices, staying during hard times, listening through exhaustion, and loving despite the past. I promise I'll never leave you, Maya, Zoe, or Liam. I promise to build this life with laughter, not silence. He paused, eyes misty, and rested his hand over hers, the gold ring on her finger gleaming. Vanessa took a deep breath, her tears glimmering, but she smiled. James, she said, her voice clear, you were once my dream, then my heartbreak. But now, you are the proof that love can return, stronger, if we choose it. I promise to stand by you, not for what we've lost, but for what we can build. A home, a family, for us and the children. She turned and wrapped her arms around the triplets. They embraced her and James together, their laughter lifting into the golden air. The pastor smiled gently and declared, they didn't say, I do. They said, we will make it. The crowd erupted in applause. Zoe tossed daisies, and Liam shouted, party, making everyone laugh. Maya quietly handed James a small drawing, an oak tree with 5 people beneath it, their family. Thank you, Uncle, she whispered. James hugged her, his chest tight with emotion, knowing this was the acceptance he had yearned for. After the ceremony, guests gathered around tables to share cornbread, barbecue, and stories of Willow Grove. James and Vanessa sat side by side, their hands tightly clasped, eyes glowing under the string lights. Helen raised a glass of lemonade and called out, to love that rose from ashes, may it endure. Vanessa leaned against James's shoulder, his warmth grounding her. For the first time, she was no longer afraid. Despite the pain of the past, they were writing a new story, together with Maya, Zoe, and Liam. As night fell, the children chased each other beneath the string lights. James and Vanessa stood beneath the oak tree, bathed in moonlight. I'm happy, James, she whispered. He kissed her forehead and murmured, so am I. This is home. Beneath the Willow Grove moonlight, they stood, not just lovers, but a family, bound by love and the courage to begin again. Spring in Willow Grove carried a breath of renewal. The wheat fields glowed a vibrant green, and wildflowers bloomed along the red dirt roads leading into town. In the small wooden cottage of Vanessa Brooks, now Vanessa Carter, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden hue over the kitchen table where James Carter was slicing apples for breakfast. Wearing a gray t-shirt and a flour-dusted apron, he no longer resembled the high-powered tech CEO of New York. He was now a husband and a father, smiling radiantly at the sound of Maya, Zoe, and Liam laughing in the living room. 6 months after their simple wedding beneath the oak tree, their family had become inseparable, like branches interwoven beneath the light of Willow Grove. Vanessa stood in the kitchen doorway, her loose dark curls cascading down, brown eyes shimmering as she watched James awkwardly cut fruit. Are you sure you don't need help? She teased gently. James grinned and offered her a slice. I'm learning from the best, he replied, kissing her cheek. Vanessa laughed, warmth spreading through her chest. She remembered the early days of James's return, the fear, the hesitation, the cautious heart that wondered if he'd leave again. But now, seeing him in the apron she had gifted him, watching him patiently play with the kids, she knew she had been right to believe in him. Maya, Zoe, and Liam sprawled across the rug in the living room, drawing for a school project. Once so guarded, Maya now called James Dad with a natural ease that moved him every time. Dad, look at this, she cried, holding up a drawing of a house beneath an oak tree, 5 people holding hands. James crouched down, his deep blue eyes glowing. "That's beautiful, Maya," he said, pulling her into a hug. Zoe, beaming, chimed in, "I drew you in your apron because you always burn the pancakes." Liam giggled and added, "But you make the best lemonade." James mock pouted, then pulled all three into a giant embrace, their laughter ringing through the house. Vanessa watched from the doorway, her heart full. She remembered the long years raising the kids alone, still grieving David, still unsure if she could ever let James back in. But he had proven himself through bedtime stories for Liam, soccer games with Zoe, and long talks with Maya about her dreams. He hadn't just become her husband and the father the children needed. She joined them, sitting beside the kids, her hand resting on Maya's drawing. "This is our home?" she asked softly. Maya nodded, leaning into her, and Vanessa knew. This was the life she had always dreamed of. The morning passed in simple joys, pancakes by James and Vanessa, syrup fights at the table, and endless giggles. After breakfast, the family moved to the backyard, where the great oak stood, witness to their proposal and wedding. James pushed Liam on the swing, while Vanessa and Maya planted wild daisies nearby. Her hands were covered in dirt, and Zoe ran over with a butterfly perched delicately on her palm. "Mom! Dad! Look!" she squealed. James and Vanessa met each other's eyes, silent, shining with shared understanding. That afternoon, Helen, James's mother, brought Liam's favorite roast for dinner. A few neighbors also dropped by, carrying pies and fruit punch, turning the evening into a small neighborhood gathering. They sat around the wooden table beneath the oak, trading stories about spring, church holidays, and how James had become a town man again. One neighbor teased, "Jimmy, you were the most mischievous kid in Willow Grove, and now look at you, model father." James laughed, squeezing Vanessa's hand beneath the table, silently thanking fate for leading him home. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Maya with her book, Zoe with her markers, and Liam clutching his teddy bear, James and Vanessa sat on the backyard bench, the moonlight bathing them just like the night he proposed. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked, his voice low, searching her eyes. Vanessa leaned her head against his shoulder and smiled. "Not for a second," she replied. "You've changed, James, but not into someone else. You're still the man I loved, just softer, more real." He kissed her hair and whispered, "You're the reason I became this man." They sat there, hands entwined, the string lights from their wedding still hanging above the oak, glowing like unspoken promises. On the living room wall, a new photo hung in a wooden frame. 5 figures: James, Vanessa, Maya, Zoe, and Liam, smiling beneath the oak. Beneath it, a carved inscription read, "Where pain once lived, love now blooms." With its red dirt roads and church bells, Willow Grove was no longer just James's hometown. It was where he found the true meaning of life, a family built on love, courage, and grace.